In order to accept Christianity, I think one has to rationalize away a lot of stuff that does not make sense. Here are some interesting examples of stuff that doesn't make sense, and the biased arguments Christians use to claim the issue is thereby resolved when it really is not. Forgetful Mary. You all probably know the story of Mary and Joseph losing track of Jesus when he was 12 years old and finally finding him at the temple talking to the teachers there. And Mary says, "Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously." And Jesus answered, "Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" And the next verse says, "But they did not understand the statement which he spoke to them." I've always thought, what? What's so hard to understand about his hanging around the temple? Mary gave birth to Jesus as a virgin. She was specifically told by the angel that her son will be called the Son of God. Yet here she doesn't seem to have a clue about Jesus' identity. To me, that is a striking contradiction. A Christian blogger writes about this episode by first correctly asserting that there are lots of passages showing Mary and Joseph were well aware of Jesus' identity. But then he claims that this was just a brief episode of momentarily forgetting Jesus' mission. Quote, "So I think they were momentarily startled, without it necessarily following that they forgot all that God, through angels, had revealed to them. It could very well have been merely a momentary confusion, followed by a realization of, of course that's right, we knew that." Unquote. Really? This apologist conveniently ignores context, namely the previous verses where it says, "So when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem seeking him. Now so it was that after 3 days they found him in the temple." 3 days is not momentarily. They had plenty of time to figure it out. You cannot know your son is the Son of God, be told by him that he must be about his Father's business, and yet at that point still not understand why he is at the temple. Momentary forgetfulness is not a valid resolution to this contradiction. The withered fig tree. In Matthew, Jesus curses the fig tree, and it withers immediately. In Mark, the apostles notice it withered only the next day. Isn't this a contradiction? An apologetics site offers this resolution, quote, "Mark records that the disciples heard Jesus curse the tree, but he does not say whether or not they noticed the tree withered at that time." I studied this for hours. It seems to me, if the apostles were right there to hear him curse the fig tree, then they were right there to see the tree immediately wither. Did they hear him curse the fig tree but not notice that it immediately withered? Possibly, but I doubt it. The much more plausible explanation is that fallible human beings wrote the stories without any divine guidance. My point here is not to refute biblical inerrancy as much as to refute biblical trustworthiness. One of Jesus' good sayings was Luke 16:10, where he says that someone trustworthy in small matters is trustworthy in large ones, and similarly, someone untrustworthy in small matters will be untrustworthy in large matters. No thought for tomorrow. Christians claim that Jesus' advice to take no thought for tomorrow means don't worry too much. It does not mean don't take care to provide for yourself and your family. But Christians are ignoring Jesus' actual words, which are, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you." And by all these things he means food and clothing, material things. Verse 31, what shall we eat? What shall we wear? People always assume Jesus is very reasonably saying, don't worry so much. But read the passage yourself. What he is very unreasonably saying is, don't worry, God will take care of you. And that is not true. not true in the categorical way Jesus presents it. Jesus is presenting a utopian concept of the world that does not match reality. Despite their faith, plenty of believers throughout history have starved to death or died of diseases. And Jesus' naive claim that God takes care of the birds is not true either. In most bird species, only about 50% survive their first year of life. Worry more about spiritual matters than you do material things is good advice. Don't worry more than you need to is good advice. But here, Jesus overstates the case, as he typically does, in saying, don't worry, God will take care of you, God will provide. That is not reality. Jesus is selling dreams. Take sandals or not. Matthew has Jesus telling the apostles not to take sandals and staffs. In Mark, he tells them to take only sandals and staffs. This is an obvious contradiction in English, but Christians will appeal to the original Greek and subtle differences in meaning, claiming that in the first case, it means do not acquire additional sandals, staves, and stuff. In the second case, it means take only what you already have, the sandals and stuff you already have. Thus, it is not a contradiction. Quote, Jesus did not mean for the apostles to discard the staffs and sandals they already had. Rather, they were not to go and acquire more. Somewhere in this defense, a Christian refers to the, quote, indirect middle aorist subjunctive. It's funny, I used to teach grammar and I have no idea what that is. You would think the Bible would be written for normal people, not advanced grammar specialists. But okay, I'll accept that as a possible resolution to this apparent contradiction. I don't want to be accused of being closed-minded. My bigger points here would be, 1, if you are highly motivated, you can almost always find some possible explanation. And 2, the fact that there are so many apparent contradictions in the Bible is not a good sign. I would expect the real book of God to be beautifully consistent and not need thousands of apologetic books to be written in its defense. Did Judas hang himself or not? Matthew says Judas hanged himself. Quote, then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself. But Acts says he died falling into a field. Quote, now this man purchased a field with the wages of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his entrails gushed out. So which is it? Christians will scoff at atheists who claim this is a contradiction. I remember a colleague of William Lane Craig's saying that he learned the easy explanation for this alleged contradiction way back when he was in junior high school, for Pete's sakes, namely, that Judas could have hanged himself from a tree, and then the rope broke and he fell into the field. Simple. But, first of all, it makes no sense to give an account of someone's death without even mentioning that he hanged himself, that he committed suicide. And secondly, you still have the airtight contradiction that he threw down the money versus he purchased a field with it. How many women at the tomb? Christians welcome the problem of how many women came to the tomb. Was it just Mary or other women also? John has just Mary. The other 3 Gospels have Mary and other women. For Christians, the resolution is easy. John just simplified the story. It's not necessary to list all the women. And key point, John does not specifically say that it was only Mary. To me, that's a fairly reasonable resolution. But note how Christians are now committed to admitting it would have been a contradiction if it did say only. In fact, I remember Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man, specifically admitting somewhere in his writings that yes, if that passage had said it was only Mary, then it would be a contradiction. So, let me present the contradiction of David committing only one sin all his life, yet committing another one also. 1 Kings says David did only one thing wrong in his life, quote, because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not turned aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. That's the Bathsheba episode. Here is the concept of only. But in 2 Samuel, David admits he committed another serious sin in taking a census against God's will. And David's heart condemned him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. So here we have a contradiction that cannot be rationalized away. 1 does not equal 2. Not to mention the more important moral contradictions. The Bible refers to David as a man after God's heart, yet he was a damn murderer. This is a hero? A man who murders a loyal soldier to get his wife? Not only that, David was a corpse mutilator. As well as a promiscuous person. One Christian claimed to me that David did right in the eyes of the Lord all his life because whenever he did sin, he repented properly afterwards. I don't buy that at all. A man after God's heart does not commit murder in the first place. It's a horrible thing how the Bible glorifies those who grovel to an egotistical God over those who are truly virtuous in their actual behavior. The second coming, imminent or not? Jesus said to his disciples that the apocalypse, the final judgment, will happen in his generation. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. He said that some standing here in front of him will still be alive when it happens. Yet it is 2,000 years later, and an apocalyptic final judgment has not happened. Christians will try to get around this contradiction by claiming that this prophecy was not about when the apocalypse will take place, but when the temple will be destroyed. And the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 A.D. within Jesus' generation. Please, read Matthew chapter 24 for yourself. It is not about the destruction of the temple only, but about the temple and the final judgment both. One to follow the other. Verses 29 and 30 make that very clear. Quote, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the temple destruction, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. That is fully apocalyptic language, not just language about a regional disaster. In verse 37, Jesus even compares what is soon to happen to the flood of Noah's time, an apocalyptic worldwide event, not just a limited disaster. So Jesus is not predicting just the destruction of the temple, but also the imminent coming of the final judgment. Incidentally, Jesus was also specifically wrong about the temple in saying that not one stone of it will be left standing. The Wailing Wall is still there today in Jerusalem, and a culture of worship is still active there. Some apologists claim that this generation refers to the future generation that sees the warning signs of the end, and means that they will not die until the end comes. But it makes no sense to tell the anxious people right in front of you that some far future generation who sees the signs of the end times will not pass away until the end times actually occur. They're going to say, yeah, well, so what? What's your point? We're not particularly interested in the dynamics of what will happen to some far future generation long after we're dead. There is no hint in these passages of some far future generation. It says this generation, not that generation. It does not say the day will come when or someday, which is what logically would have been said. I mean, come on, the whole thrust of the book of Revelation is that all these things are imminent. In Revelation, Jesus says, surely I am coming quickly. Quickly means quickly. It doesn't mean 2,000 years after the people being addressed have long since died. And the word surely means surely. It means plainly and clearly. It does not mean according to a belabored esoteric interpretation. There are references to the imminence of the end times throughout the New Testament. The end of all things is at hand. In these last days, he, Jesus, will not tarry. The time is short. Things which must shortly come to pass, for the time is near. And behold, I, Jesus, am coming quickly to give to everyone according to his work. Watch therefore, and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass. It makes no sense to express this sense of urgency if the world still has 2,000 years to go. And lastly, Jesus didn't write anything down. If he thought the world was going to continue for thousands of years, he would have written things down to forestall the inevitable disagreements to follow. Note that there are hundreds of different Christian denominations, each claiming that their understanding is the only correct one. Jesus was familiar with religious disputation. The fact that he did not take the trouble to have his teachings written down clearly is evidence that he thought he didn't need to, because he expected the end of the world in his generation. Jesus was simply wrong. And being wrong about something so important as the end of the world disqualifies him as the Son of God. Jesus went to his death nobly and courageously, but he was wrong. And Christian apologists are concocting dishonest interpretations to get around that fact. Hell. Liberal Christians, of course, don't worry much about contradictions. Their faith is not in the inerrancy of the Bible, but in the persona and teachings of Jesus. Okay, fine, let's deal with Jesus and his teachings. To me, the biggest and most profound contradiction in Christianity is the doctrine of hell. A God who is claimed to be a God of love tortures people severely without end. That is not love or justice. It's insane cruelty. The liberal Christian would immediately say that he does not interpret Jesus' pronouncements on hell literally. It's symbolic in some way. My response is, number one, Jesus' description of hell as fire, flames, and furnace may be symbolic, but the purpose of symbols is to point to an underlying reality. In this case, severe punishment that will never end. And that is insanely cruel. And point number two, a person who allows hell to be interpreted as this severe eternal conscious torment, as Jesus did, cannot be a wise person, much less the Son of God. Jesus was a religious extremist who taught some inspiring things, but also some terrible things. If Christianity is not true, does that mean all meaning and purpose in life has been lost? No, that's just the mindset that Christians are systematically indoctrinated into from an early age. I know lots of atheists that lead meaningful, productive lives. And I'm sure there are plenty of hopeful agnostics who lead meaningful, happy lives. And I like to think there are actually plenty of soft theists like me who believe in the probability of a general God not tied to any particular religion. Soft theism is a much more honest and a reasonable theological position than Christianity. I think the real God is found not in traditional religion, but in the beauty of relationships, friendships, music, nature. Thanks for watching.